I never really had a lot of respect for Dave. I mean, he was a good front man of that style, but that wasn't anything I ever wanted to be. Growing up, when I was saying I'm going to be a musician, I was looking at Stevie Winwood, I was looking at Eric Clapton, I was looking at Jimmy Page and Peter Townsend. Those are my, Mick Jagger was as close to being flamboyant as I could think about being.
Months before Eddie Van Halen died, he made Sammy Hagar promise something. It was a secret Eddie didn't want anyone else to know, not even his own brother Alex. The two hadn't spoken in years, but a comedian helped bring them back together for one final conversation. Eddie talked about a dream he still believed in, a tour that would bring everyone back one last time. He told Sammy they'd make noise again once he beat his illness. Sammy kept that promise quiet for years. Now he's finally revealing what Eddie whispered to him before the end. Sammy Hagar came into the world on October 13, 1947, in Monterey as the youngest of four. And from the start, his life moved in a way that never let him forget how hard things could be. His family lived in a labor camp before they made their way to Fontana, just east of Los Angeles, and the move didn't make life easier. His father, Bobby Hagar, had once been a bantamweight boxing champion and worked long shifts at the Kaiser steel mill, but his struggle with alcohol kept the family drifting from one place to another. Some nights they had no roof and slept in tents, hoping the next day would be better. His mother ended up raising the children almost entirely on her own, and the kids often went to bed hungry. Sammy learned to cook at 8. He boiled spaghetti and made tomato sauce from the tomatoes they grew because there was no other choice. He picked fruit, delivered newspapers, and mowed lawns to bring in money. Yet through all of this, he pushed himself in school and built a work ethic that followed him everywhere. He understood early that nothing would come easy, and every opportunity meant something. His father's boxing days shaped him as well. Bobby Hagar had fought Manuel Ortiz several times, both as an amateur and later as a pro. He had knockout power that made people talk, with his first 8 professional fights ending in knockouts. He brought that intensity home and pushed Sammy toward boxing. So Sammy trained hard from a young age. He learned to jab fast and move with quick feet, and sparring with his father and older brother taught him how to stay sharp. By 14, he was already preparing for a career in the ring. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. Sammy stepped into a sparring session with a Mexican fighter who already had 30 professional fights behind him. A single brutal left hook rattled Sammy so badly that he felt the truth hit him just as hard. He didn't want to live a life where he would be hit like that again. His mother saw the pain on his face and begged him not to continue. That moment settled inside him, and he turned his focus away from boxing and towards something that had been calling him quietly from the background. Music felt like the better path, and once he made that choice, he didn't look back. Music began fitting into his life in ways nothing else had. And then, something unforgettable happened. On June 5, 1964, when Sammy was 17, he sneaked into the Rolling Stones' first ever United States concert at the Swing Auditorium in San Bernardino. He and his friends waited behind the venue for hours until the doors finally opened. They rushed in with everyone else, swallowed by a crowd buzzing with excitement. The atmosphere lifted him the moment he stepped inside. Teens were climbing onto the stage, pushing forward just to get closer to the band. When the Stones started playing, the sound exploded through the auditorium in a way he had never felt before. He talked about that night for weeks. It stayed with him because he knew something had changed. He felt music pull at him with a force stronger than anything else. And that moment helped him realize that rock was not just something he admired, it was what he wanted to live. By 1973, Sammy was still chasing that feeling. He was part of a San Francisco cover band, barely scraping by, juggling odd jobs just to survive. Then one night changed everything again. Ronnie Montrose, a respected session guitarist who had just left the Edgar Winter Group, happened to catch a glimpse of Sammy on stage. Montrose heard something in Sammy's voice that caught him right away. Within days, he recruited Sammy for his new hard rock project. Sammy was only 25 and had never recorded a major album. He had been working jobs like washing dishes to stay afloat. But the moment Montrose walked into that rehearsal space, Sammy sensed that the road ahead was about to bend in a new direction. Montrose carried the kind of reputation that could open doors. He was already famous, collecting royalty checks as high as $8,000, which felt enormous in 1973. Sammy knew the opportunity was rare, and he stepped into it with everything he had. Montrose's self-titled debut album arrived in October 1973. It didn't storm the charts at first. It barely made it to number 133 on Billboard in the United States. Still, the music began spreading quietly, especially across Europe, and people kept coming back to it. The album included Sammy's first written song, Bad Motor Scooter, and the heavy track Rock Candy, both of which slowly turned into radio staples. What surprised everyone years later was the way the album grew. It eventually sold more than 1 million copies and earned platinum status in 1986, 13 years after its release. Eddie Van Halen even called Montrose his favorite band and said the heavy open chords helped shape his own sound. The album's rise became one of those slow-burning legends that proved great music sometimes needs time before the world catches up. But success didn't keep the band together. In February 1975, Sammy was fired during a European tour after tensions with Ronnie Montrose kept boiling over. The breaking point came when Belgian reporters called Sammy the second coming of Robert Plant. Instead of enjoying the praise, Montrose took offense and told Sammy in the car that he was breaking up the band and asked what he would do next. After 2 shows at the Olympia Theatre in Paris, Sammy got sick from food poisoning and didn't even fly home with Montrose. He was already planning what he would do once he returned. Their falling out was so talkative that Montrose later joked that Van Halen took far longer to fire Sammy than he did. Still, the moment pushed Sammy to think for himself, and it opened the door to something new. What happened next showed who the band truly believed in. After Sammy's exit, he formed his solo group and took bassist Bill Church and drummer Denny Carmassi with him. Both had been pushed out of Montrose earlier, and their decision to follow Sammy spoke louder than words. Their loyalty helped Sammy build a foundation for his solo career. They recorded several albums together and kept moving forward with a unity that Montrose could no longer hold. That shift showed how strong Sammy's leadership had become and how determined he was to make his own mark. The Montrose debut album continued to grow long after the split. Its legacy stretched into the next generations, inspiring bands like Van Halen, Poison, and Mötley Crüe. The story of Sammy rising from poverty to dishwasher to rock frontman, paired with an album that took more than a decade to reach platinum, became one of rock's most surprising stories. Everything about it felt earned. From there, Sammy stepped into a new level of fame. He wasn't just another singer trying to make it. Through the late 1970s and early 1980s, he turned into a true solo superstar. He headlined major tours across the United States and Europe. After his first solo release in 1975, it took a few years before he hit his stride. Then, in 1981, Standing Hampton arrived and went platinum, pulling him into national attention. His next album, Three Lock Box in 1982, also went platinum. By then, he was selling out arenas with 10,000 seats and doing it night after night. His success was so strong that in 1985, when Van Halen approached him to replace David Lee Roth, he was actually earning 3 times more per tour than any individual member of Van Halen. Joining them meant taking a financial gamble, which surprised almost everyone who heard about it. Then came the song that would carry his name through the decade. I Can't Drive 55 hit the airwaves in September 1984 as the lead single from his VOA album. It entered the Billboard Hot 100 at number 77 on September 23, 1984, and climbed for 8 weeks until it reached number 26 on November 18, 1984. It stayed on the chart for 12 weeks in total. MTV played the video constantly, and the message hit home for millions of American drivers frustrated by the federal 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. The song also reached number 9 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. And when the 55-mile-per-hour law was finally repealed in 1995, Sammy even took part in changing California's highway signs to 65, sealing his identity as the Red Rocker who pushed back against the rule in his own loud way. Years later, in 2000, the song secured a place on VH1's 100 Greatest Hard Rock Songs list at number 100. More than 600,000 fans voted, and that recognition put the track beside giants like AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, and Black Sabbath. It became a permanent part of his shows, and even after he joined Van Halen, fans kept shouting for it. It stayed alive because it carried something people felt. By 1985, the truth was clear. Sammy Hagar had built a solo empire strong enough to stand on its own. His tours were bringing in numbers that shocked the industry, and his albums kept climbing to platinum. That financial strength let him negotiate with Van Halen from a place few singers ever reach. It all began with a phone call that came at a moment when the whole rock world felt upside down. On April 1st, 1985, Van Halen told the world that David Lee Roth had quit. The timing made fans think it was a prank, but the truth settled fast. It wasn't a joke. The band had just played the U.S. festival in front of 37,500 people, earned $1 million, and were soaring with songs like Jump and Panama. Yet behind all that success, the tension was already bending the band out of shape. Roth wanted more control and more say in everything, and it pushed everyone else to the edge. Noel Monk, their manager, later wrote that almost no one outside the inner circle saw this split coming. The announcement hit like a shockwave, and while fans were trying to make sense of what had happened, the band was already searching for someone who could carry the fire forward, which is when Sammy Hagar's name began to float into the picture. Then came the moment that changed everything. Eddie Van Halen spotted Sammy Hagar's Ferrari at an auto shop and felt something spark. It was simple and almost strange how casual it looked from the outside. Eddie dialed Sammy out of nowhere. Sammy always joked that he had predicted the call because he kept telling his friends he would end up joining Van Halen someday. Soon, the two met, and Sammy noticed how Eddie carried himself with a calm, genuine energy that felt very different from Roth's wild image. Eddie talked about music, about the future, and about building something new. What started as a chance sighting of a car slowly turned into a new path that neither of them had fully imagined in that moment. Their first meeting opened up another truth. Sammy asked direct business questions, like how much they had made on the last tour, and their answers left him stunned. Even with all their fame, the band had split their earnings evenly and had spent almost everything. Sammy learned he had been making 3 times more money as a solo artist than any member of Van Halen. That thought made him hesitate because joining the band could mean a significant financial loss. Yet as he listened to their passion and saw how much potential lived in the room, he felt pulled toward them. It was a reminder that rock stars at the top of their game could still be reckless with money, and it made Sammy see how much they needed not just a singer, someone steady. When they finally jammed together, something clicked right away. Sammy began scatting words that suddenly rolled into Summer Nights and My Radio, and that line grew into Why Can't This Be Love? The band had 5 songs already sketched out, but Sammy's presence changed everything. His voice shifted their sound. Producer Mick Jones then stepped in and shaped the pieces into something ready for the radio. When Mo Austin from Warner Brothers heard the track live, he said, "I smell money." The song became huge. It marked the start of a new era. People who doubted Van Halen without Roth suddenly realized the band wasn't fading at all. They were transforming. Recording Dreams pushed those changes even further. Mick Jones wanted Sammy to hit the highest notes he could reach. Sammy pushed himself so hard, he began to hyperventilate and nearly passed out. But somewhere in that pressure, a perfect take emerged. The chorus lifted the whole song, and those soaring words, "We'll get higher and higher," turned into one of the band's most iconic moments. That kind of work came with pain. It came with fear, too. But sometimes, the greatest moments come from being pushed beyond what feels possible. Once Sammy joined in 1985, the band started stacking achievements one after another. They released 5150 in 1986, OU 812 in 1988, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge in 1991, and Balance in 1995. All 4 albums hit #1 on the Billboard 200. Together, They sold over 16 million copies worldwide, with 5150 alone crossing 8.8 million. They sold out stadiums across the United States and across the world. By 1996, Van Halen became the only band to ever have two different lead singers deliver 4 consecutive #1 albums. That run was so strong that For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge won a Grammy for Best Hard Rock Performance in 1991. The numbers spoke for themselves. The Van Hagar years were powerful enough to rewrite what people thought the band could be. Their first single with Sammy, Why Can't This Be Love, came out on March 24, 1986. It entered the Billboard Hot 100 at number 52 and climbed until it hit number 3 by May 17th. It stayed there for a week and lasted 16 weeks on the chart. It topped the Cashbox Top 100 at the same time and became a hit in the UK, Australia, and Sweden. In the United States, the single was certified gold after selling more than 500,000 copies. Critics who expected the band to crumble without Roth had to watch the numbers rise instead. Fans embraced the new sound, proving that the change hadn't broken the band. It had opened a door. This entire era ran from 1985 to 1996. 11 years of constant work, constant touring, and constant reinvention. Every studio album reached #1. 5150 sold 8.8 million. OU 8112 sold 4 million. For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge reached nearly 5 million. Balance hit 3 million. In 1991, they won that Grammy and kept moving forward. Even though the era ended in 1996, with growing tension between Sammy and the Van Halen brothers, it remained one of the strongest periods in their history. They left behind a track record no other band had matched. What made this period even more special was how much Eddie flourished under Sammy's voice. Eddie finally had someone who could sing the melodies he heard in his head. With that freedom, he wrote more complex songs like Dreams and Love Walks In. Mick Jones supported that growth by pushing Sammy in the studio, shaping songs, and urging the band into new territory. The sound became richer and more layered. Critics later called it one of the most creative periods in Eddie's life, and it showed how much the right musical partner can unlock. Losing their longtime producer, Ted Templeman, had seemed like a setback, but working with Mick Jones changed everything. Jones took long jam sessions and turned them into polished songs ready for the radio. He gave Why Can't This Be Love its tight structure, and shaped Eddie's synth riff into the soaring beginning of Dreams. With tour dates and album deadlines closing in, Jones helped 5150 become a massive success. His presence anchored the new direction, helping the band move past the loss of Templeman and into a new era filled with hits. But not all chapters were bright. During the 2004 reunion tour, Eddie was struggling deeply. Sammy said Eddie was completely whacked out on alcohol and drugs. His guitar playing was so affected that fans had trouble recognizing the songs. Sammy described Eddie as frighteningly skinny, hunched over, missing teeth and part of his tongue, drinking wine straight from the bottle. There was even a moment when Eddie broke windows on a private jet with a wine bottle. Sammy grew terrified. He feared Eddie might die on stage. He wanted to quit after just 40 shows, but felt trapped by financial penalties in the contract. It became one of the darkest periods in the band's history and left Sammy shaken for years. The story became even heavier when Eddie's medical history resurfaced. In 2000, doctors found a callus on his tongue that turned out to be cancer. The surgery removed roughly a third of his tongue. Eddie blamed the cancer on holding metal guitar picks in his mouth, along with smoking and substance abuse. He was declared cancer-free in 2002, but the cancer returned later in his throat. The surgery and lifestyle damage left him physically weakened, and those struggles became part of what made the 2004 tour so difficult. Every night before a show on that tour, Sammy sat alone in his dressing room, listening for Eddie's guitar. He wasn't listening for a warm-up. He was listening to see if Eddie could still play. That small, painful ritual showed how much he cared and how much fear lived inside him. He worried Eddie would collapse. He worried he would die in front of thousands of fans. Sammy later said it was one of the worst experiences of his life. Even with all the hurt, he still said he respected Eddie deeply. He remembered the kindness, the talent, and the spark Eddie always carried. That tour left scars on everyone involved, but it also showed how fragile even the greatest legends can be when life presses too hard. Everything began with something so small that no one expected it to explode the way it did, and that made the whole thing feel even heavier when it finally broke apart. In June 1996, Sammy Hagar found himself fighting over just one lyric in a new song. It sounded tiny, almost silly, but inside the band, it carried weight because months of tension had already pushed everyone close to the edge. Eddie Van Halen said the line needed to change because the director of the movie Twister didn't want it tied too closely to the film. Sammy believed the song was already perfect and felt the change would hurt it. The disagreement grew fast. It grew in a way that showed how thin their patience had become. By the end of that week, Eddie called Sammy and told him he was fired. He added that Sammy acted like a solo artist in the band, so he might as well be one for real. The speed of it stunned Sammy. One moment, they were arguing about a lyric, and the next, he was out of a band he had led for nearly 10 years. Right after that call, Eddie drove straight to David Lee Roth's house. The move spread through the music world like a spark catching dry grass. Sammy later said it felt worse than sleeping with the enemy. Roth had been the band's original frontman, the one Sammy had spent years being compared to, the one he never imagined Eddie would run back to. Yet within days, Eddie and Roth were writing together again and recording 2 new tracks for the band's best of album. Fans were shocked, the press exploded with theories, and Sammy felt the betrayal settle deep inside him. He had no warning. The reunion happened behind closed doors, and he only learned about it after the damage was done. 5 days after Eddie met with Roth, the phone rang again. It was June 16, 1996, and Sammy picked up without expecting his entire world to shift a second time. Eddie told him he never listened, never did what he was asked, and then repeated the same line about being a solo artist. Sammy had no idea this call was coming, and hearing it so bluntly left him breathless. 10 years together ended in minutes. The band made it official on June 26, 1996, announcing that Sammy was out and Roth was back. The firing became one of the most abrupt breakups in rock history because everything happened behind curtains with almost no warning to the man who had carried the band through 4 #1 albums. But the truth behind the firing traveled further back. In October 1993, the band lost their longtime manager Ed Loeffler to cancer. He had been the glue that held their chaotic personalities together. After his death, they hired Ray Daniels, Alex Van Halen's brother-in-law. Sammy never connected with him, and slowly, the band's chemistry began to crumble. Arguments grew sharper, trust faded, and Sammy started feeling like he didn't belong in the room anymore. Ed's death didn't just take away their manager, it took away the peacekeeper who kept the band from turning on itself. During this mess, the band began talking about doing a greatest hits album. Sammy hated the idea because he believed it signaled a band running out of ideas, but the pressure mounted and he gave in. Then he found out that one of his songs for the Twister soundtrack had been replaced with an instrumental called Respect the Wind. The other song, The Silent Extreme, became Humans Being, but even that one was tied up in the lyric fight that ended everything. Sammy felt as if every decision pushed him further to the side. He wanted time with his family. He wanted rest. Instead, he felt tricked into recording new material that didn't count. Watching his song get replaced made him feel like he wasn't valued anymore, and that feeling pushed them closer to the point where the split became impossible to avoid. Years later, Sammy's life shifted in a completely different direction. He didn't just build a tequila brand, he created something that burst into a worldwide sensation. After opening his Cabo Wabo Cantina in Mexico in 1996, he teamed up with a family distillery in Jalisco and launched Cabo Wabo Tequila. What started as a fun side project sold 37,000 cases in its very first year. That number shocked the entire spirits industry because no one believed a rock star could create something serious. By 2006, sales jumped to 147,000 cases a year, and Cabo Wabo became the second best-selling premium tequila in the United States. People loved it not because it had a celebrity name, but because it tasted better than the big brands that filled supermarket shelves. Awards poured in across global competitions, and the brand kept growing. By that same year, revenues hit $60 million annually. It stopped being a small project and turned into a real business with a national sales force and constant recognition. Sammy's face and story were on the bottles. His passion powered the marketing, and the world responded by making Cabo Wabo a name everyone knew. Then came May 7, 2007. Sammy sold 80% of Cabo Wabo tequila to Grupo Campari for $80 million. It felt surreal to people around him because the brand was worth more than his entire music career combined. Later, he sold the remaining 20% for another $11 to $15 million. In total, he walked away with nearly $95 million from a business he built from the ground up. It proved that he was not just a musician. He was a creator who could turn ideas into empires. The story kept growing. In October 2024, Alex Van Halen released a memoir called Brothers. Readers noticed immediately that it ended in 1985, right before Sammy joined the band. It erased the entire Van Hagar era, the years that produced 4 #1 albums and some of the band's biggest hits. The decision angered many, but especially Sammy. He called the omission blasphemy because he believed it disrespected the work he and Eddie created during those years. The feud between Sammy and Alex was already long and painful, stretching back 21 years with no real communication between them. They hadn't spoken since around 2005. Sammy tried many times to understand the silence, but the wall never came down. He believed jealousy played a part, especially because he and Michael Anthony stayed active performing Van Halen songs while Alex had no path to touring alone. Business disagreements added fuel to the fire, especially the success of Cabo Wabo, which Alex stayed far away from. The tension became something that hovered over every interview, every documentary, every memory involving the band. In 2025, Sammy sent a message directly to Alex, saying he didn't want trouble, didn't want arguments, and only wanted to be left alone. He added that he was still out there keeping the Van Halen name alive and making everyone money by performing their songs. He wanted recognition for the era he helped build and felt hurt that Alex refused to accept it. The feud wasn't just about the past. It was about identity and pride. It was about who gets to define the story of one of the biggest rock bands in history. Yet in the middle of all this tension, another story waited quietly behind the scenes. Months before Eddie Van Halen passed away in October 2020, comedian George Lopez helped reconnect Eddie and Sammy after years of silence. During their reunion, Eddie shared a secret wish. He wanted to bring everyone back for one final tour. He told Sammy they would make noise again once he beat his illness. He made Sammy promise not to tell Alex. It was something Eddie wanted to reveal himself. That final conversation stayed with Sammy in a way words never leave. Eddie said they would reunite the next year. He just needed to get better. Sammy carried that promise with him long after Eddie was gone. Behind Eddie's wish was a dream tour called the Kitchen Sink Tour. Eddie and his son Wolfgang had been planning it quietly since 2015. The idea was to bring together every major Van Halen era, including Roth, Hagar, and Sharon. Promoter Irving Azoff was involved. Michael Anthony was approached. It could have been the biggest reunion in rock history. But by the time the plans were taking shape, Eddie's health was fading. Doctors told him in late 2017 that he had just 6 weeks to live, yet treatments in Germany gave him 3 more years. Even with all the hope and all the planning, the tour never happened. Wolfgang later said it was one of his father's deepest regrets. Through all of this, Sammy kept building. By 2025, his net worth had reached $150 million. Most of it came from business ventures like Cabo Wabo Tequila, which brought him nearly $100 million. Music royalties added another $40 million. Real estate contributed around $30 million. His success came from a mix of music, branding, and smart decisions. And behind the fame was his family. He married Betsy Berardi in 1968 and had 2 sons, Aaron and Andrew. After their divorce in 1994, he married Kari Carte in 1995. They had 2 daughters, Kama in 1996 and Samantha in 2001. His family stayed at the center of his life, even when band drama tried to pull him in other directions. Together they built the Hagar Family Foundation in 2008, focusing on helping children and fighting hunger. Sammy often said that everything he achieved came from having people around him who loved him long before the world paid attention.